When a teenage girl escaped from her California home and called 911, responding officers found something shocking. She and her 12 siblings had been trapped inside the home for years, starved, physically abused, and forced to live in squalor.
I cannot describe in words what we went through growing up.
But it turns out the rescue and their parents' convictions for torture wasn't the end of the nightmare ordeal for several of the kids who had just been rescued from a house of horrors. And now, Riverside County is ponying up millions of dollars for putting some of the rescued children with an abusive foster family. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. The stunning true crime case of the Turpin family exploded onto the scene in 2018. That's when it was discovered that a California couple had subjected their 13 children to torture, including chaining them to beds, starving them, and letting them shower just once a year. It was awful. The Turpin children ranged in age from 2 years old all the way up to 29 when they were discovered. The children's grandparents told ABC7 in LA that David and Louise were Pentecostal Christians, and they believed that God was calling on them to have as many children as they could. They allegedly homeschooled the kids, requiring them to memorize long passages from the Bible. The family lived in Fort Worth, Texas, before they made the move to Southern California. And photos released by the person who bought the foreclosed property they left behind revealed some of the horrific conditions. You can see the stains all over the floors and the walls. The unidentified homeowner said that he was certain that feces had been smeared on the walls of every single room. In 2014, the family made the move to Paris, California. It's about an hour away from Los Angeles. Neighbors told the news outlets that they had seen the children from time to time, sometimes looking pale and malnourished, but they had no idea that there were 15 people living in that 4-bedroom house. Police in Riverside County started to figure out what was going on when one of the children, Jordan, who at the time was 17, managed to get out of the house through a window with a deactivated cell phone and called 911.
I've never been out. I don't go out much, so I don't know anything about the streets or anything. Okay, I live in a family of 15 people, and my parents are abusing. They abuse us, and my 2 little sisters right now are chained up. There's 13 kids, and then a mother and father.
And how many of your siblings are tied up?
2 of my sisters, 1 of my brothers.
How are they tied up, with rope or with what?
With chains. They're chained up to their bed.
Do you think anybody in the house will need to go to the hospital?
I'm not sure. Sometimes we live in stilts, and sometimes I wake up and I can't breathe because how dirty the house is.
When was the last time you had a bath?
I don't know, almost a year ago. But sometimes I feel so dirty. I wash my face and I wash my hair.
Are you homeschooled?
No, we don't do school. Our mother tells people we're homeschool. Our mother tells people we're private schools, and she has a fake private school set up. But we don't really do school. I haven't finished first grade, and I'm 17.
Jordan had also taken photos and videos on the cell phone documenting some of the most recent abuse. That's according to reporting from the Mercury News. When the children were rescued, 7 of them were adults, while the other 6 were minors, but they all had been extremely isolated from the outside world. In fact, it was reported that when officers came in to rescue them, some of the kids didn't even know what a police officer was. The first deputy to speak with Jordan Turpin told ABC News that she didn't know what the words injured or medication even meant. And what first responders found in that home was a true nightmare. Children caked in dirt and chained to bedposts for weeks at a time. Some were so emaciated that they couldn't walk, according to ABC. And one preteen's arm was the size of what a 4-month-old baby's arm would be. Because of severe malnutrition, some of the children have cognitive impairments. Riverside County Deputy District Attorney Kevin Beecham relayed harrowing stories to People magazine, saying that when she was 9, one of the oldest children was caught taking food from the pantry or fridge. So she says that her mom made her get her pet cat and put it outside and then watch as feral dogs killed it. The kids reported that they had been beaten, strangled, and banned from socializing even with each other. According to prosecutors, it appears that only the 2-year-old escaped horrific abuse and starvation. Louise and David Turpin were arrested and booked on a whole litany of charges in connection with the torture and abuse of their 13 children, as well as faking the documentation they gave the state saying that they were homeschooling their kids. In 2019, the couple agreed to enter guilty pleas, presumably so the children wouldn't have to testify, but some of the victims did have a chance to speak in open court and give victim impact statements. The court ordered that they wouldn't be shown on camera.
My parents took my whole life from me, but now I'm taking my life back. I'm in college now and living independently. I love hanging out with my friends and life is great. I believe everything happens for a reason. Life may have been bad, but it made me strong. I fought to become the person I am. I saw my dad change my mom. They almost changed me, but I realized what was happening. I immediately did what I could to not become like that. I'm a fighter, I'm strong, and I'm shooting through life like a rocket.
Other statements were read for the court by an advocate.
Through the years, things became more and more overwhelming, but they kept trusting in God. I remember our mother sitting in her recliner and crying, saying, she don't know what to do. She didn't want to use rope or chain, but she was afraid her children were taking in too much sugar and caffeine. The reason our parents didn't stop buying the soda was because Father needed it for work. He would fall asleep driving and got in an accident. They didn't know what else to do. I believe our parents feared if they asked for help, they would lose their children. Our parents didn't know we were malnourished. They thought we all got the gene from our mother because she was so small. I remember Mother saying, God has blessed us with healthy children. Our parents would get us pizza and Mexican food every other week, and sometimes more than once a week. Our mother would always tell us to let her know if we are still hungry, and she will give us more. Their first child went to a public school. They started noticing she wasn't really learning much, so Mother started teaching her at home and saw a big difference. Our parents decided to start homeschooling all their children. It worked out good at first, but through the years it became very overwhelming. I believe our parents were afraid to put us in public school for many reasons. They felt that God put it on their hearts to homeschool. When we came to California, people treated us so much better, and people started telling us our family was a blessing. Our parents finally felt safe to start taking us out as a family. They got us annual passes to Disneyland and took us to see the Grand Canyon, Flintstone Park, Vegas, etc. Every year, from as far back as I can remember, our parents tried to give us the nicest Christmas they could. They would get us what we wanted, even if they couldn't afford it. They always tried to keep up with our birthdays every year, too. Closer to the end, things became more overwhelming again. I truly believe most of this was because our mother lost both of her parents in 2016. I feel like 25 years is too long. I believe with all my heart that our parents tried their best to raise all 13 of us, and they wanted to give us a good life. They believed everything they did was to protect us. If at all possible, I would really appreciate if the court would place our parents as close to the detention center they are in right now, so if we ever want to visit them, we can. Also, I want the 2-year restraining order lifted, and I want to be allowed to talk to both my parents by phone. Thank you for hearing my statement.
The prosecutor announced 5 other victim impact statements had been written as letters, which the Turpins could read in private. And when it came time for David and Louise to speak, David started weeping, and his attorney took over.
Well, ask my attorney to read my statement for me.
All right.
Your Honor, I thank God for all of my children. Each one of them is a blessing from God. My homeschooling and discipline had good intentions. I never intended for any harm to come to my children. I'm sorry if I've done anything to cause them harm. I'm glad we were able to resolve this case without my children being forced to testify. I love my children, and I believe my children love me. I hope and pray that my children can stay close to each other and look out for each other, since their mother and father cannot be there for them and with them. I hope the very best for my children in their future. I hope my oldest son successfully completes the 2 college degrees he's been working on.
I'm sorry, I needed to modify that part of the statement. I hope my oldest son and 4 daughters currently in college successfully complete the degrees they are working on. And I hope they are successful in their chosen professions. I'll try to continue. I wish my second son success in finalizing his career plan and completing whatever additional education may be required. I wish happiness and success for my other children as they complete their lower level education and make productive plans for their future. I am so proud of each and every one of my children. I miss all of my children, and I will be praying for them. I long for the opportunity to have contact with them again. Thank you.
I want to say to you, Your Honor, and the court, I'm sorry for everything I've done to hurt my children. I love my children so much. I'm blessed to be the mother of each one of them. I only want the best for them. Their happiness is very important to me. They are very smart and amazing individuals. I hope they get all the education they need to make their dreams come true. They deserve only the best in life. I don't want any of them to be sad or depressed because of all of this. I want them to know that Mom and Dad are going to be okay. I also want them to know I believe God has a special plan for each of them. I really look forward to the day I can see them, hug them, and tell them I'm sorry. I want them to know how special they are and how very proud I am of them. I pray for my children every day. I want to say again, I'm truly sorry. I am for everything I've done to hurt them. I love them more than they could ever imagine. Thank you, Your Honor.
The judge had no sympathy for either defendant.
The selfish, cruel, and inhumane treatment of your own children has deprived them, your family, your friends, and society, and especially both of you, those gifts. Their lives have been permanently altered in their ability to learn, grow, and thrive. You have delayed their mental, physical, and emotional development. To the extent that they do thrive, the only reason that your punishment is less than the maximum time, in my opinion, is because you accepted responsibility at an early stage of the proceedings, and you spared your children from having to relive the humiliation and the harm they endured in that house of horrors.
The defendants were sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. After they served the first 25 years, they would be eligible for parole, but by that time, David will be in his 80s, and Louise, who married David when she was just 16, will be 75.
Each of the Turpins have pled guilty now to multiple counts of elder abuse, torture, child abuse, false imprisonment, and those pleas will result in 2 life sentences. They're going to serve an indeterminate sentence of 25 years to life. Each of them are will be sentenced to that sentence. The plea agreement incorporated charges to ensure that the defendants admitted abuse to each of the victims named in the original charging documents. So that was all of their children except the youngest. So there's 12 named victims in the charging documents.
Jordan and her oldest sister Jennifer spoke with Diane Sawyer on ABC's 2020 and 2021, 2 years after their parents were sent to prison. In the interview, Jordan had this to say about the night she climbed out that window. Quote, "I was always terrified that if I called the cops or tried to escape, I would get caught, and then I knew I would die if I got caught. But at the end, when I saw all my younger siblings, I knew that's what I had to do." In the years since they were rescued, the children have done their best to move on. Jordan has a not insignificant following between TikTok and Instagram, where she posts dancing or lip syncing videos, sometimes with her sisters. Jennifer wrote a book called Where Was God? It chronicles what happened to her growing up and how it's impacted her faith. But now there's a new Diane Sawyer special out, and it features 3 different Turpin children speaking out for the first time: James, Julissa, and Jolinda. The new episode is called The Turpins, A New House of Horrors. And that is because after their rescue, the 6 minor-aged children were actually sent into a brand new nightmare. The foster parents at their new home abused them. Marcelino Olguin, his wife Rosa, and their daughter Lenny's were arrested in 2021 and changed their pleas to guilty in 2024. Marcelino admitted to committing lewd acts on a child under 14, false imprisonment, and willful child cruelty, and he was sentenced to 7 years in prison. The 2 women entered pleas to false imprisonment, willful child cruelty, and dissuading a witness. They each got 4 years of probation. But even the adult Turpin children have had a hard time transitioning to a more normal life. They had been promised resources and services from the county, but a report found they experienced food insecurity and housing problems, and they had trouble getting help. District Attorney Mike Hestrin told ABC News that the children had been victimized all over again. A third-party group examined the county's services for children and vulnerable adults and put out a report that was more than 600 pages long. The report's introduction said in part, quote, "With respect to the Turpin siblings, we conclude there were many times over the last 4 years that they received the care they needed from the county. This was not always the case. However, and all too often, the social services system failed them when they complained about their circumstances. They often felt frustrated, unheard, and stifled by the system." In July of 2022, the 6 youngest siblings filed civil lawsuits against Riverside County and the private agency ChildNet. The first suit is on behalf of Jane Does 1 through 4, while the second is on behalf of Jane Doe 5 and John Doe 6. The complaints were filed before the Olguins entered their guilty pleas, but their conviction may have helped bolster the family's claims. Now, I want to read for you now from the complaints. Quote, "In early 2018, the County of Riverside removed plaintiffs and their 9 other siblings from their biological parents, David and Louise Turpin, because of a long history of abuse and neglect. Plaintiffs had been imprisoned in their home and allowed virtually no contact with the outside world for most or all of their lives. As defendants clearly understood, these children were in a very fragile state, both physically and emotionally, and therefore needed to be placed in a home where they could recover from their trauma and learn how to integrate into society. The county asked ChildNet to find a placement for plaintiffs and 2 of their siblings. The lawsuit claimed that ChildNet had knowledge that the Olguins shouldn't be allowed to foster kids, but allowed it to happen anyway. And we'll warn you, the details ahead, they are disturbing. Quote, "Defendants knew that they were unfit to be foster parents, particularly for children as vulnerable as plaintiffs, because they had a prior history of abusing and neglecting children who had been placed in their care. Defendants were aware of credible reports of abuse and neglect committed by this couple and their adult daughter. However, defendants did not act upon that information. They failed in their duties as a foster family agency, as a child protective services agency, and as mandated reporters. As to ChildNet, it had a financial motive to continue placing a large number of children in this foster home and thereby strengthen its relationship with the county of Riverside, and it put that financial motive ahead of its responsibility to children. It goes on to say, against the advice of some of its own employees, ChildNet placed plaintiffs and 2 of their siblings in foster care with Mr. and Mrs. O. Soon thereafter, defendants put on notice that these foster parents and their adult daughter were sexually, physically, and emotionally abusing and severely neglecting plaintiffs. At least one of plaintiff's siblings had conversations with defendants' social workers in which she disclosed the abuse and neglect and asked for help. The abuse and neglect that plaintiffs were subjected to included, quote, Mr. O sexually abused plaintiffs by, among other things, grabbing and fondling their buttocks, legs, and breasts, kissing them on the mouth, and making sexually suggestive comments. The foster parents and their daughter physically abused plaintiffs, including but not limited to hitting them in the face with sandals, pulling their hair, hitting them with a belt, and striking their heads. The foster parents subjected plaintiffs to severe emotional abuse, including but not limited to, as punishment, making a child sit by herself, sometimes outside for many hours at a time, making the children sit in a circle and recount in detail the horrors they had experienced while living with their biological parents, preventing the children from communicating with their adult siblings, verbally abusing plaintiffs, cursing at them, and telling them that they were worthless, would never be loved, and should commit suicide, threatening to return the children to their biological parents, threatening to put their hands in an electric socket, forcing plaintiffs to eat excessive amounts of food, which led to eating disorders, forcing them to eat their own vomit, forcing them to watch as a foster child in the adult daughter's care was severely physically abused and tortured. Defendants had a duty to protect plaintiffs, but instead protected the foster parents by failing to report the abuse and neglect of plaintiffs to Child Protective Services or to law enforcement, and by failing to intervene and interfere when abuse and neglect was reported by others. Defendants allowed plaintiffs to remain in the home for 3 years. These are the causes of action the plaintiffs were suing under: violation of Child Abuse and Neglect Reporting Act, negligence, breach of mandatory duties, breach of duties arising under special relationship. One day after the new Diane Sawyer special aired, it was announced that a settlement was reached between the plaintiffs, ChildNet, and Riverside County. The county will pay $2.25 million, while ChildNet will pony up $11.25 million. That is a total of $13.5 million. But both Riverside County and ChildNet denied any sort of wrongdoing, a sentiment that they made clear to Diane Sawyer in her special as well. In a statement, the legal groups that represented the children called out ChildNet specifically for its comments to ABC News, saying, quote, unfortunately, the Turpins and attorneys for the Turpin family are shocked and horrified by ChildNet's public statement issued in response to the Diane Sawyer special, claiming that, quote, ChildNet helped these children thrive. That assertion is profoundly disturbing. ChildNet placed these children with a child molester and multiple child abusers. ChildNet did not put these children through years of litigation and pay a substantial amount of money out of the goodness of its heart, but instead, because they could not justify their repeated and catastrophic failures to protect the most vulnerable children entrusted to its care. To get the perspective of someone who was on the ground in Southern California when the story first broke in 2018 and has covered this story in the years that followed, I spoke to longtime reporter Brian Rokos about what he remembers about this case. Joining us now to talk more about this case is Brian Rokos, reporter with Southern California News Group. You can read his work at pressenterprise.com. Thank you for once again joining us on Law and Crime. And, you know, when it comes to this case, which so many people remember very, very vividly from 2018 when these children were rescued, you covered this case closely. Let's go back to that time. What do you remember about when this story first broke?
Well, I remember just the sheer scope of it. I mean, we're talking about 13 kids, and the fact that somehow no one seemed to know that this was going on, that, you know, the kids led kind of a nocturnal existence. The parents were very careful not to let them get seen by neighbors, but yet they would still take the kids to Disneyland. They would take them to Las Vegas, and no one seemed to notice anything unusual.
And it's just, the details that came out, and I just remember the story of, the children who were able to escape, and the planning that went on for the amount of time it went on to try and get someone to help. Where were you when you like came upon this story? Like, what was that like for you?
Well, first of all, I wasn't the only person who worked on it at the time. I know I was in the office when we got a news release from the sheriff's department about 13 children having been abused, the parents having been arrested, and our newspaper and every other media in Southern California raced down to Paris to the home and trying to sort out what happened and who these people were and what their background was and what their influences were. And it was just it was a lot of work to kind of peel back the layers and find out how this all happened. And as it turned out, the criminal case was just the start of it, which was kind of the shocking part.
And, to be thinking about this settlement with 6 of the Turpin children, $13.5 million, and what happened after that rescue, and the fact that these kids who escaped such terror and then found themselves in an abusive situation, how did that, because you're covering, I'm sure, the case against the mom and the dad, and they end up getting life in prison, 25 parole after 25, and there's that part of the story. Like, how did it come about that everyone started to realize that, in the years after, that 6 of these kids were not in a safe place?
Well, you have to actually back up a little bit to after the criminal case was settled, and these kids, they Jordan, Joshua, and Jennifer went on national television, and they said that they weren't they didn't have access to money that had been donated. They didn't have access to food, to quality accommodations. And it was kind of a cry for help. They went out there and had no life skills. They were not worldly at all, and there were instances where they were taken advantage of. And Riverside County finally hired a retired judge to investigate what went wrong, and he generated a 600-page report that said the county had done some good things, but also had failed the children. And so you hoped from there that the county would get its act together and take care of the kids a little better. And then we find out that the foster family agency, ChildNet, which contracts with the county to place kids in foster homes, had placed them in a home with the Olguins that there apparently had been some suspicions about them in the past. Nothing that had ever resulted in any criminal charges. And then we find out that the 6 kids had been physically and psychologically abused in that home. And we came to find out that Riverside County had difficult getting access to ChildNet's records. You wonder how that's possible. I mean, gosh, if you're worried about these 6 kids, my God, you run a bulldozer through the front door of ChildNet to try to get these records. And of course, the county won't say exactly what happened. And I interviewed a sheriff's detective. He was the lead detective on the Turpin's parents' criminal case, and he was brought in on the foster case. And he told me that Riverside County just kind of needed him to, as he put it, nod his head and sign off on the county trying to investigate the old ones. And he said that the county was just going to kind of wash their hands and they couldn't find out anything. One of the problems was that ChildNet and the county, they were interviewing the Turpins with the old ones listening in. So, these kids were terrified of the old ones. So naturally, they're not going to, say, hey, I just got molested. But fortunately, this detective, Thomas Salisbury, he saw through that. He saw what was going on, and he got the kids out of there. So he was the hero in this thing. And the old ones later, the husband and the wife and the daughter, they pled guilty to various charges. And from what I understand, talking with attorneys and so forth, since that time, is that all 6 kids who were in the Oldwin household, 5 are adults, only 1 is a minor, but everyone is doing a lot better.
And it's just, I mean, and I know like part of the abuse too was just not an access to education, and the idea of like the life skills that you need where you escape this terrible situation with their mom and their dad. And then you're just in this very vulnerable place. And it just doesn't seem like anyone did anything to help them, in those moments. And I was reading in just this settlement with ChildNet and Riverside County and 6 of the children, that's still like those agencies in the county aren't really accepting responsibility for mistakes that were made. Like, what does, from just the reporting you've done, like accountability look like for the county and for ChildNet for this to happen on their watch?
Well, we can't get ChildNet to say anything other than a very carefully worded news release where they really cherry picked at the facts. And we didn't even use most of it. Riverside County, they've got an ad hoc committee that still is looking after this case. Riverside County has increased the number of caseworkers. They've increased the pay. They have, what we're hearing is that there are a lot of silos in the county among the different departments, and they weren't talking to each other. And so it was difficult for the departments to compare notes. And it sounds like there were sometimes people were throwing the rules at each other, saying, I can't provide information legally. I can't provide information. So they say they've knocked down a lot of those walls. Unfortunately, there have been a number of these types of cases. They just haven't generated the type of publicity the Turpins have, and where the county has not come through for the kids when they've had the opportunity. So you have to kind of hold your breath that it's not going to happen again. But who knows?
Yeah, no, and the you just think of the original case and what was going on in some ways behind closed doors, but also in plain sight, and kind of looking back at that, like, how was it that this family, witnesses would say, oh, the kids, they wouldn't, speak. And like, it seems like quietly that there were suspicions that something was wrong, but it wasn't until a child escaped and police were able to do this welfare check that they just, found what was actually going on inside the home. Like, what was it that allowed this to continue on, the original abuse at the hands of their own parents for such a long time?
Well, one of the issues is just that they might have suspected something, but they didn't want to call the authorities, and then it turns out to be wrong. And then suddenly, maybe the Turpins, turn against them. The kids, if they were battered and bruised, and if that was easily seen, it might have been a different thing. I mean, the kids weren't walking around with black eyes, but you had 20-year-old kids who looked like they were 12, and people didn't realize what was going on there. And if they came out at night. I can tell you that I did a story after this happened, and hotline calls to Child Protective Services surged after this. Not on the Turpin case, but on other cases, because it came out that people saw things but never reported them.
And I remember seeing the pictures of like when they would go to Disneyland, and it just was, it's one of those stories, like each time it comes up in the news, it's just so chilling to think about. And sadly, we've seen so many other terrible cases, of captivity, that may not get the same publicity, but might make, regional news and all of that in your area. And I know now with the settlement, the story's back in the headlines, but I mean, how often does the case of the Turpins in Riverside County get talked about and be something that still is top of mind for people, even though it's been several years since the escape happened in 2018?
And sometimes I have to remind people about it, and inevitably they say, "Oh yeah, David Turpin, he's a guy with that crazy haircut." I mean, that's how some people remember it. He had like the Dutch boy
right
haircut. People move on. They don't things that you would think people don't remember, or things that you think people would remember. They don't. And this is a case, however, that never seems to end. And for the kids, the 13 kids, it is never going to end. I mean, they're never going to get those years back. And imagine if you were, just starting your life at 7 or 8 or 10 or 20, or I think Jennifer was 29 when this happened. That one way or another, it's going to be with them forever.
Yeah, it's just, again, it's just a case. I mean, even when you do see him with that haircut, it just brings back all the memories of just the horror of when that story first broke. I remember I was working at a television station in Florida at the time, and I can remember seeing the images of the house and it just being something that absolutely shocked me, as it should, because it was just so terrible. And then to now think about the abuse that happened to 6 of those children that we know about in the years after, it's just terrible. Brian Rocos, Southern California News Group reporter. You can read his work at pressenterprise.com. Thank you, as always, for joining us on Law and Crime. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Anytime.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we're also now streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.